A meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin appears increasingly likely after both the White House and the Kremlin confirmed plans were underway. Putin said the United Arab Emirates could host the talks, but he ruled out meeting the Ukrainian President Volodomyr Zelenskyy, saying the conditions for that encounter were not yet in place. The White House says the Trump-Putin summit could take place as early as next week. Trump has been pressing for a meeting as he seeks to secure an end to Russia's war on Ukraine. Let's take a closer look and bring in Michael Kimmage. He's a professor of history at the Catholic University of America. He's also a former U.S. State Department expert on Russia and Ukraine. Welcome, Michael. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. So, Vladimir Putin says he is open to discussing an end to the war with Trump. What do you make of that?
Well, it certainly serves Russia's interest at the moment, looking like Russia is the deciding power together with the United States to finish up the war. But that's very much a matter of optics. It's hard for me to believe that much of substance will emerge from this particular meeting.
Mm-hmm. How much of an impact do you think Trump's threat had in getting Moscow to agree to a sit down? Did it even take that kind of pressure, or would Putin have been happy one way or another to sit down with Donald Trump?
I think more the latter. I think this is really more of a concession on the part of Trump to meet and also to allow Putin to announce the place of the meeting and to determine whether the Ukrainians will be present. So I don't think it's a matter of Trump pressuring Putin into doing this. It's more almost the opposite of Trump showing willingness to do this and Putin being happy to do so.
Why would Donald Trump let Putin control the narrative in that way?
It's an interesting feature of his relationship with Putin that he tends to defer to Putin, to almost no other world leader, and certainly to no political figures in the United States, Democrat or Republican, at the moment. But there is a pattern of deference toward Putin that goes back certainly deep into Trump's first term.
Now, Putin says the conditions are not in place for him to meet with Zelenskyy. He, of course, doesn't recognize Zelenskyy's legitimacy as the Ukrainian president. How do you interpret that statement? Does he mean bilateral talks? Would that include a three-way meeting in the UAE with Donald Trump? Or does he just say, both of us in the same room, that's never going to happen?
Right. Let's recall that the war begins with a Russian effort to topple the government of Ukraine and presumably to send Volodymyr Zelenskyy into exile or to send him into jail or something like that. And it's not clear to me that Russia has moderated those particular war aims. So if Russia is trying to replace the government of Ukraine one way or another, it's very unlikely that Putin would agree to a meeting with Zelenskyy. And he wants to show that Ukraine is a second-order country. It's not among the big countries like Russia and the United States. So it's not surprising at all that Putin would rebuff Zelenskyy in this way.
Where does that leave any kind of diplomatic efforts then? If the man who started this war doesn't want to sit across the table with his counterpart to discuss how to bring it to an end, and it's widely regarded as the only way out of this conflict to get to a negotiated exit.
Yeah, it leaves the diplomacy in a pretty sorry state. That's been the case for the last 6 months. It's not true that the Trump administration has really moved the needle on diplomacy since coming to office in Trump's second term. It's very unclear that Russia is willing to make the kinds of concessions to reach a peace deal to which Ukraine would agree. And I don't think that Ukraine, with or without pressure from the United States, is going to make the kind of concessions that would get Russia to stop. So I think, in short, we're very far from an end to the conflict. Of course, it's not unusual that heads of state meet to discuss things and to share ideas, and that's the appropriate context for looking at this particular meeting. But I doubt that it's going to resemble anything close to a diplomatic breakthrough.
Mm-hmm. Now, the notable absentee here is the EU, is NATO, are Ukraine's allies in Europe. What role are they going to be playing in all of this, in this process that is seemingly starting now, but in your opinion is not going to lead very far? But are they being completely sidelined here?
Well, let's not put too much weight on the meeting itself. Europe is a crucial supporter of Ukraine. Europe is, very much a part of its own diplomacy vis-a-vis the region, and Europe is going to be instrumental to the reconstruction of Ukraine after the war. So Europe is going to play a huge role, but in this particular meeting, it's going to be the two attention-grabbing heads of state, the two solo actors as they see it in their own eyes, Trump and Putin. So that tells you something about how the United States and Russia see the world, but it doesn't tell you everything about Europe's relationship to Ukraine and to the war, because it's a very prominent and important relationship and will remain so for a very long time.
Michael Kimmage, professor of history at the Catholic University of America, thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Our coverage continues now with DW correspondent Ritters in Kyiv. Rebecca, has there been any reaction from the Ukrainian government to Vladimir Putin's comments?
Well, Brent, the reactions and the words coming out of the Ukrainian government, President Zelenskyy in particular, who has been speaking in the wake of all of this diplomacy hullabaloo with the Americans going to Moscow. He has been speaking, but much of what he's been saying has been relatively devoid of too much detail. Much like the words coming out of Washington, much like the words coming out of Moscow, people keeping a tight lip on what was discussed at this meeting and the next steps going forward. Yes, we're hearing about a potential meeting between Trump and Putin. We're hearing that perhaps Zelenskyy is going to be sidelined. That will definitely be making the Ukrainians nervous. They're, of course, worried that President Putin will try and pull one over Trump and that they will then get an unfavourable deal and it will be forced upon them. That's obviously a huge concern. They've been talking with their European allies, trying to make sure they have a united front. But, of course, that language coming out has been vague of detail, everyone being very careful not to give too much away at this very delicate stage.
The confirmation from Moscow comes a day after Trump's Ukraine envoy held talks with Putin. Has President Zelenskyy, has he been briefed on those discussions?
Yes, he has. He was called personally by Donald Trump yesterday after that meeting concluded in Moscow. Again, we don't know what the briefing included. We don't know what was said yesterday, and we don't know what President Trump discussed with President Zelenskyy, though we did hear that European leaders were also on that call. So, yeah, as I say, very, very little detail at the moment. It's all sort of like whispers and sources and, very much everyone holding their breath to find out what the next steps will be. But certainly President Zelenskyy has been briefed, and he's been really been on the phone all day with European leaders trying to discuss Ukraine's position, trying to get his point across and trying to get them on board as a united front.
Yeah, let me pick up on that. Zelenskyy, I understand, has also been speaking to the French and German leaders. Do we know what they talked about?
Yes, they talked about potential formats for discussions, and President Zelenskyy very keen to do what he's calling the 2 bilateral, 1 trilateral meeting format. Although, as we were just discussing, it seems unlikely that President Putin is willing to discuss directly with him, but that's what Zelenskyy is pushing for, and that's what he's talking with his European counterparts about, that having a bilateral meeting between Trump and Putin, another bilateral meeting between Trump and Zelenskyy, and then a trilateral meeting. Of course, we don't know what the meetings will look like at this stage. He's really shoring up support for the Europeans, trying to make sure that Ukraine and of course Europe are not going to get sidelined. He really pressed in the conversation with Friedrich Merz of Germany, saying in the statement after that call, he said that Ukraine is a part of Europe. We've going to great lengths to try and join the European Union, and this is a European problem. So really trying to keep his European allies on board and as a united front, as I say. And of course, he's got a lot of support from them. But what happens next, really, we just have to wait and see.
DW correspondent Rebecca Ritters with the latest from Kyiv. Rebecca, as always, thank you. And for more on that, I'm joined now by DW's Juri Rescheto, who covers Russia from Riga for us after officials, you may remember, closed our Moscow bureau. So, Juri, talk to me here. Putin says the conditions are not in place for him to meet with Zelenskyy. How do you interpret that?
Well, Brent, Putin said that a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is possible, but yes, you're right, the right conditions need to be set up first, which is still a long way off. Well, that is, of course, a nice way of saying that the Kremlin doesn't recognize Zelenskyy as the Ukrainian head of state. Putin remains true to his principles and convictions. He has said this repeatedly in the past. His argument is that Zelensky's term as president had expired and that there had been no elections in Ukraine. Putin doesn't say that that is not correct because there can be no elections during the war in Ukraine. So I can imagine that Putin is now playing for time, possibly suspending the fighting in Ukraine in order to then say, hey, there will be no fighting. Now you Ukrainians can elect a new president, and only then we will speak to you. In that case, Putin would be blackmailing Zelensky, possibly with the approval of Trump.
Donald Trump says that his Ukraine envoy's talks with Vladimir Putin on Wednesday were very constructive. What is the Kremlin take on those talks? Do we know?
Well, I think the Kremlin may have achieved a lot yesterday. First, Russia will apparently not be directly punished after the ultimatum expires tomorrow, most likely. Second, Putin will most likely speak directly with Trump, which is exactly what the Russians have been demanding, Brand, since December 2021. A month before the war began, they wanted such a meeting with a US president on equal terms. And thirdly, there are now media reports or speculations that very specific steps have been discussed in the Kremlin yesterday, including which territories Ukraine must surrender to Russia and for how long, and that US sanctions, probably against Russia, of course, could possibly be dropped in whole or in part. However, these are media speculations. We will have to wait until the official results, especially after the personal meeting between Trump and Putin. The very bitter aftertaste, Brent, now is, of course, that Ukraine was not asked and will obviously not be sitting on the negotiation table. Two nuclear powers want to decide the fate of a third sovereign country.
Trump also saying that a solution to the Ukraine conflict could be a matter of weeks away. We have heard from him, we've heard this from him before, but do you think Putin is ready to agree to a ceasefire?
Well, I think if details now discussed are true, so precise, that I can actually imagine Putin agree to a ceasefire under the conditions mentioned above. But the question is also whether Ukraine, which has now been completely left out of the picture, so to say, whether Ukraine will agree to it. And if so, what kind of ceasefire will it be? A temporary ceasefire or a complete end to all fighting, the whole end? For how long? In this peace, is this peace, or is it the end of the war completely, or just a break? So how will it be observed and monitored, controlled? There are lots of questions remaining. Let's see what the next week probably will bring.
DW's Juri Rescheto with the latest from Riga. As always, Juri, thank you.